Hello and welcome to Bledel's retro rants or retro reviews, whichever I prefer. Reviews is more fitting. And on this video I will be reviewing the first episode of the Gilmore Girls from season 1. It is simply called Pilot. So yeah, just a quick setup. I thought I'd do some to go along with my current TV reviews. I thought I'd do some older shows, some retro shows, and sort of do them all the way through. As you all know who follow me on the channel, I've been doing Buffy the Vampire Slayer, one of my favourite shows, and I'm 4 episodes into that now, so yeah, so look out for more of that soon. And I do have other ideas of other classic shows I want to do, my favourite shows. Another one I'm planning to tackle at some point is the X-Files, and tackle is the right word for that because there's so many of those. But yeah, for something a bit different, I thought I'd start the Gilmore Girls. So just a quick setup with the Gilmore Girls and how I came to it. So a few years ago, a lot of people I knew online were kind of raving about it. It seemed to be like one of their favourite shows, and I heard a lot of good buzz about it. And going in, I obviously wasn't sure if it would be for me, because it's, coming of age drama, and it's obviously focuses on a mother and her daughter, and I didn't know if I would be the target audience, I'd say. And I mean, obviously I'm not the target audience, but obviously I can still enjoy something aimed at females if there's something in it for me and if it's well written, all that sort of stuff. So I mean, they're all on Netflix, so I thought I'd give it a go, and I actually binged all 7 seasons pretty quickly. And then of course there was the revival about 3 years ago now, Year in the Life, where they did 4 feature-length episodes to sort of round it off, if you like. The original showrunner, Amy Sherman-Palladino, returned to work on that. But yeah, I mean, surprisingly to me, in a way, I did really enjoy it, and I think there's a few reasons for that. One, first of all, it's just one of the best for pop culture references. I mean, they just pack so many into each episode, and some really obscure ones as well. They really go deep with that. They sort of reference everything and anything. So, I mean, that's just something I'm always going to love. So that stuff is really great. I think also it has that balance where it's an escapist show, and it's almost like the ultimate escapist show, or certainly one of them, where it's set in this fictional, sleepy, small town in Connecticut called Stars Hollow. And it's a town that essentially runs by its own rules. It sort of goes by its own logic. And I think we all appreciate that, escaping into fiction in that way and getting away from our own, mundane lives. And I think, so having this really different sort of town that really runs against the conventions of the norm is always going to appeal. But at the same time, you get that very real sense of community, and how important that is, and how important the characters in the town you grow up in is to your development and your growth as a person. So there is something relatable to that. And I think they do balance it out with relatable stories. I think the stuff that the characters go through in Gilmore Girls will be relatable to pretty much everybody. And I mean, I just love the sharp dialogue and the delivery of the dialogue. I mean, Lauren Graham, who's one of the lead, just has this really screwball style to her, where it's razor sharp delivery, and yeah, the timing of it, and it's just so spot on. And I do love that style, loving old like movies that use that style. So that's another thing that just draws me into the show. And it is one of those shows. It's a very easy watch, and it's consistently very watchable, even when it's not at its best. So I mean, you could argue the later seasons are the weaker seasons, which I think many people would argue. But even in those later seasons, episode to episode, it remains very watchable. I think, often it's, you maybe pick out certain characters or certain relationships you're not so keen on. And I mean, probably the relationships are the weakest part of the show for me. But I think it's okay because they don't drag down the show too much, even though obviously they're important because they're happening to the main characters. I think you're still into the show because you like the main characters and you still find it entertaining to watch. So it does have that going for it as well, even if you're not liking a particular storyline or relationship or character, really there's not much let down in the episodes. They're all very watchable. And they blur into one in a sense, I don't think there's a lot of where you can pick out, this being a good or a bad episode. They're all pretty much on the level. I mean, some will stand out more than others. So, I mean, that might be a challenge. These might be quite short videos. But I think it's more than more certain storylines, certain characters. But, yeah, I mean, the core cast of characters, I pretty much like them all, really. They're all enjoyable in their own way. But yeah, I'll get deeper into it. And I mean, there are a lot of characters in the supporting cast, so I'll sort of comment on them when I get to them, really. But yeah, just the setup, which everyone will know. It's about Laura Graham, a single mother growing up in Stars Hollow, and at the start of the show, she has a 16-year-old daughter called Rory, who's played by Alexis Bledel, I'll go with that, who people recently would have seen in The Handmaid's Tale. She's astonishing in that. You never would have guessed that was Rory Gilmore in that show, the same actress. But yeah, so essentially the Lorelai character had Rory when she was 16, which I guess makes for a nice little link to the fact that now Rory is 16 at the start of the show, and Christopher, who's Rory's father, essentially couldn't handle the responsibility at the time. It was kind of an unplanned pregnancy, so he sort of bolted. And he's a character who does pop up from time to time. He does have storylines, but yeah, so essentially Lorelai had to raise Rory on her own, and it's a kind of a big theme in the show and of her characters, and she made a conscious choice to sort of do it on her own, to not rely on the support of her parents and the money. And that's one of the things, is that Richard and Emily, the parents, do come from money, and they still live in like a fancy sort of house, and they have maids and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, it is significant that Lorelai made that decision not to rely on their money and to sort of go her own way and raise Rory herself. So that sort of tension becomes a big part of the show. So anyway, that's the setup, and it's obviously a coming-of-age drama / comedy. So it's all about Rory's experiences growing up, her love life, her education, her career, and same with Lorelai, pretty much, her experiences too, and their bond as, mother and daughter, and really special bond, and you can really feel the chemistry and really believe in them as mother and daughter. So anyway, I'll get into it and discuss more as I go along. So as I said, first episode simply called Pilot. It's directed by Leslie Linker Gletter, who is a TV director of note. She originally worked on Twin Peaks, so she was brought up under the tutelage of David Lynch, so directed quite a few episodes in the first and the second season of Twin Peaks. She has also directed episodes of The West Wing, and I think, although I'm not sure, maybe The Sopranos. I think she might have done some episodes of The Sopranos. So, yeah, pretty impressive TV CV there for this director. And I mean, I don't know if direction is something you really go to the Gilmore Girls for, but I think the direction is on point in this episode. You know, she does some nice whip, like, panning around town, sort of, some nice sharp visuals. So it's a well directed episode anyway, and the script, which is fitting, is by Amy Sherman-Palladino, who of course is the showrunner. She's the showrunner for the majority of the run, but I think it was the last 2 seasons she dropped out, and I think that's partly why she wanted to come back with A Year in the Life, because she wanted to finish the storylines in her own way. She wanted her sort of take on it rather than how they ended. And so we have 7 seasons, I should say, and it debuted in 2000, so to 2006, and then Year in the Life was the revival in 2016. So here we go with the pilot. And the first scene is in Luke's diner, which is again setting up what's going to be a regular venue for the series. You know, there's pretty much every episode will have at least one scene in Luke's diner, and Lorelai and Rory regularly go in there, as do characters from around the town. And again, I think it's setting up, you know, a very typical heart of the community type, you know, place. You know, people in small towns particularly tend to, you know, levitate towards a particular diner or a particular cafe, and it becomes a regular place. And so Luke's cafe in itself has a character, is like a character in itself in the show, and yeah, it's something where it becomes consistent. And I should say, actually, the episode opens with a song by the Lars, and it's their most famous song, There She Goes, which was a bit of a 90s indie anthem. But I sort of think of it in a lot of like 90s films and TV shows, and it's a very, you know, cute sort of, you know, cheery sort of ballad. And yeah, you may be associated with quite light-hearted small town settings, but I think the reason to mention it is because typically Gilmore Girls doesn't normally have much kind of outside music from, like, you know, artists or bands, however you want to say it. It's quite rare because obviously the title, the credits open with you've got the song by Carole King, Where You Lead, which is a sweet little anthem, and quite a fine, or not fine, that's not the right word, but quite a cue getting Carole King to do it, and actually a nice bit of consistency. In a later season, Carole King actually cameos in the show, and she's there for a few episodes, so that's a great idea. But that's the main theme which you have in every episode, and outside of that you don't get a lot of like original music. You tend to, or music, you know, that have come from like pop or rock bands. You tend to get, you know, this acoustic, you know, folky, quite light, you know, kind of like score, which, you know, sort of kind of sums up a certain mood, and that appears a lot, but normally you don't get sort of popular songs and stuff like that. So I don't know, because it's been a while since I've seen season 1, so we'll see if it happens after this episode, but it certainly tends not to happen. And so this first episode is different, and there's a couple of examples. There's this, and then there's a song later on, which I'm not sure what the song is, but it's like an Annie Lennox sounding type song. Happens quite late in the episode, so it's different in this episode, but typically you don't get that sort of stuff in Gilmore Girls. So as I said, we start in Luke's diner and we're introduced to Luke. Luke, played by Scott Patterson, who becomes a big supporting character, is a big character in Lorelai and Rory's life. Has a really great chemistry with Lorelai. They have really good banter, and their relationship becomes a big part of the show. And I think it's the contrast. I think because he's really different to her, he's really deadpan and quite moody and dry. And I think it's that side of him that because she's quite different to that, I think that makes they gel really well because of their differences. But yeah, Luke has a really good arc over the show, and he's a really relatable guy as well, even though he's very moody. I mean, the show makes that stuff funny and likable, but yeah, he is essentially a really good guy, a really relatable working class sort of guy. And yeah, it's someone you root for throughout the show. So he has a good arc. He's a very enjoyable character. And yeah, really well played by Scott Patterson. And I think he has a close bond with Rory. I think he does become a sort of unofficial father figure to her. They're obviously, her relationship with her real father is sort of on and off. So he does sort of fill that void at times. So the first sort of interaction is Luke actually asking Lorelai, how many cups of coffee is that for you today? And the kind of joke is, and she's obsessed with coffee. She has several coffees a day. Woman after my own heart, of course. But yeah, that becomes a big thing in the show, as well as the amount of sugar she consumes. And you see her eating lots of Pop-Tarts and donuts at various times. And yeah, hey, it's this thing, it's escapism, because hey, she retains this perfect figure, and it's like, well, okay, would she really? But it's all part of the show, part of the fun, I guess. So there's that, and then the big gag in this scene is then this guy, Joey from out of town, is in Luke's diner, and he initially starts trying to chat up Lorelai, and she obviously sort of coolly disposes of him. If she's friendly, but she sort of sends him on his way, and yeah, doesn't go for it, obviously. But then later on, when she's at the counter talking to Luke, she realises then Joey is then trying to chat up her daughter, Rory, who's now come in. And yeah, it's just a really funny scene, and they turn the tables on him. He obviously finds out, firstly, that Lorelai is Rory's mother, which he can't seem to believe. Fair dues, I guess, in a way. And that Rory is actually 16, so that puts him off the scent, because I think he's meant to be at least early 20s. I'd probably say that looking at him. And so that's kind of the thing there. And then, Lorelai asks Rory what she's looking for, and she sort of says lip gloss. And she gives her all these different flavours, like strawberry, toasted marshmallow, vanilla chocolate is the other one. Roy says anything not resembling a breakfast cereal, and I think Lorelai says something like, "Oh, of course, I've got different flavours to match your your mood. And we get the first pop culture reference, which is to do with RuPaul, because Rory says, God, not even RuPaul has this many brands of lipstick or makeup, I think she said. So yeah, RuPaul, and that, I'm not sure, because I know RuPaul has been around for a while now, but obviously this was 2000. So I'm guessing maybe this was very early on in her run. So I do like references like that where it's so quick, so on the money. You know, you're referencing someone who hasn't been around that long. So that is a pretty cool reference. And we get another like pop culture reference within a couple of seconds, because Rory mentioned she's lost a Macy Gray CD. And Macy Gray, yeah, very much in 2000 was one of the big artists, you know, in the charts and that. I remember them playing her a lot on the radio where I work. So yeah, that's another, yeah, very relevant sort of message, or sort of reference, I should say. And yeah, that's kind of it segues into the credits, and we get the last song again before, so that sort of continuity. And so we see post credits, we get a look at the Independence Inn, which is where Lorelai works. She's the manager. In fact, it's a hotel, obviously by the name. Really plush upmarket hotel. And we're introduced to her best friend Sookie, Melissa McCarthy, who plays a chef, or she's a chef, the head chef in the hotel. And also Michelle, who's this really grumpy French, like, I'm not sure the official word, but he works at the counter anyway. And he's another really great character. A lot of good comedy with him. And yeah, so Melissa McCarthy, I guess this was her first big role. I mean, she would have been an unknown here when she was cast as Sookie. And yeah, I mean, she's really likable in it. She's really funny. You can see her comic chops early on. I mean, now obviously she has gone on to pretty big themes in films, and I know some people are down on her, you know, her comedy work in particular, like it's just getting quite repetitive. And you know, I get that, but I think she's a decent actress. I think she's got pretty good range, and I think with the right script, she can, you know, she is still funny. But yeah, it's been a bit hit and miss since, you know, sort of Bridesmaids, which was her big breakout film. And obviously recently she got nominated for an Oscar for Can You Ever Forgive Me, which I really liked, and I thought she was great in it. So I think that film really showed there's a bit more to her. But yeah, she's well cast as Sookie in this. And we find out in the episode then Lorelai and Sookie have plans of, you know, starting their own inn essentially. And I sort of like this aspirational side to Lorelai, the fact that she kind of wants to start her own inn, and it's almost like she wants to create an inn which is in her own sort of name, in her own sort of identity. Like, I feel like she wants to really do it on her own terms, and to sort of kind of make it a bit more accessible around town, and make it, as I said, just in her own identity. And I like that the character has ambitions like that. She's not just resting on her laurels, you know. She, you know, because she probably makes a decent wage, you know, just managing this hotel. But I like that she does have ambitions outside of that, and there's a dream. So it immediately gets you invested in the character outside of just the relationship with Rory. So we're also into, oh, I should actually mention in this scene, there's a great scene with a harp player, and the harp player is actually really brilliant. I'll just shut my phone off. Okay, so the harp player has a really good line actually, where she says, because she's being moody to the Oh, God damn it! Just say hello. Oh, okay. 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 Uh, okay. Yeah, that's fine. Alright. Okay. Alright, see you soon. Okay, bye. 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 Sorry about that. And I hate editing because I'm getting used to editing at the moment. So I probably won't edit that out. So anyway, the harp player is being moody with the customers, and Lorelai obviously mentions it to, can you try being a bit nicer to the customers? And the harp player has this great line where she says, well, if you wanted a nice musician, you should have hired a harmonica player, which is a great line. And again, she's really sarcastic and deadpan, really great. And yeah, it's a shame because I'm pretty sure we don't see her again. I think this is a one-shot episode for her. It could have been cool, to have had a few more appearances from her. But yeah, she's certainly good in this scene. So we're also introduced to Lane Kim, who is Rory's best friend. They've known each other pretty much since they've been kids. And Lane, who's one of my favourite characters, is played by Kiliko Agala. I'm going to go with it's probably wrong, but you would have seen her pop up in quite a few other TV things and little bits and pieces. So we get a scene with Lane and Rory on their way to school, and again they immediately have this chemistry. You really believe that they've been best friends for a long time, and I think Lane, she is one of my favourite characters personally, and she does bring a different sort of energy to the show. And I think she plays off Rory very well because of their different sort of backgrounds. Because Lane, her mother owns an antique store in town, and that's another place we see quite a lot in the show. And her mother's very strict and sort of traditional and coming from like an Asian background. And so we sort of see in this episode then Lane's mother wants to set Lane up with a guy who's essentially like a doctor. So they're kind of having those, it's kind of that idea of she wants her daughter to sort of be with someone with a respected career like that, and maybe with money. So again, those sorts of quite old-fashioned sort of ideas. But Lane is kind of rebelling against that. Lane's obviously a more modern, younger person. And she obviously has her own ideas and wants to essentially to date a guy she likes, and irrespective of the career and if he has money and that sort of thing. And Lane is into rock music, into music in a big way, and that's going to be a big part of her character, which I'll talk more about in future videos. But yeah, great chemistry with her and Rory from the off, and obviously they're at this like crucial stage in adolescence where they're starting to talk about boys and different things like that. And yeah, the conversations flow really well, and I sort of like at one point when they're in the antique store how Lane sort of well, it's Rory. She's under the impression then Lane's mother doesn't like her mother, and Lane says, well, she just doesn't like single parents, which is really good. So an insight into Lane's mother, Mrs. Kim, but Mrs. Kim is another one who again grows as a character, and again they have a very different sort of dynamic to Rory and Lorelai, but yeah, they do have some nice scenes with Lane's mother, and she does come on, and you do see a more sensitive human side to her as well. But yeah, quite a character once again. So lots of great characters around the town in the show. And so Rory, we see her and Lane walk into the store, into school, high school. And we see Dean for the first time. So Dean, and I know the actor has also been on Supernatural. But yeah, Dean becomes Rory's first love interest / boyfriend. And he goes to the same school, believe it or not. But he's sort of stalking around outside, and he's this big guy in a leather jacket. And obviously he's got, quite striking looks, floppy hair. And he actually makes a point of saying to Rory later, I watch you a lot every day. You come out here, you read. And he says how, he just likes her focus, how nothing can distract her from her book. And yeah, all this comes across as very stalkerish to me and kind of strange. But, yeah, I'm not really that into Dean and Rory as a couple. The chemistry isn't really there, and his character I don't really get into. But anyway, it works well enough in this episode for what it's doing. And there's a shot later on, actually, which I think they used on the credits. But basically, when Dean first approaches her, I think she's dropped her books or something, so she's picking them up. And you get a shot where Dean, he says whatever he says, and then Rory slowly looks up at him. And obviously he's a tall guy, there's a big height difference. So, yeah, it's kind of a slow thing where she slowly looks up at him. And it's a really good shot, actually, because it's like two things happening. One is, literally she's looking up at this tall guy, but also it's capturing, her sort of being swept off her feet, or being starstruck isn't the word, but being struck by his looks and by this guy who seems to be into her. And so it's a nice shot of that, a nice visual of Rory, kind of being bowled over and caught in the moment sort of thing. And obviously that's a big part of this episode, the fact that, at 16, Rory is a bit more impressionable than, she might be in later years. And so the relationship with Dean becomes a big issue with her and her mother in this episode. But anyway, Rory tells Dean to go and see Miss Paddy, another character around town who's a dance teacher. And the reason for that is he's looking for work, and Rory says, Miss Paddy knows all the places around town. And I can't remember if he gets the job in this episode, but, she puts him on to Taylor, who, again, this very grouchy kind of stickler around town who holds a big position. But anyway, he runs a grocery store, and Dean goes and works for him. And again, the grocery store is a very, typical working class sort of location, retail environment. And another place, where I think in this sort of town they would go to a lot regularly. So, yeah, it's all quite typical and fitting that Dean would work there. But the main plot of the episode really is Rory finds out she's gotten into Chiltern, which is this really upper class, prestigious sort of high school. And essentially she applied to Chiltern, so that she could potentially get into a really good university or college. I think it's Harvard in particular at this stage that she wants to go to. So I could be wrong. Someone might have to correct me, but I think it is in this episode. So, the idea is that the best chance to get into Harvard is through this school. So she's been accepted. I mean, I don't know if this is them playing with the rules a little bit, because I don't know if it's possible really when you've been at one high school for most of that period of education, if you can suddenly move. Well, obviously I know people move schools, so maybe it is possible, but I don't know if it would be, because obviously the idea is then. But anyway, someone can let me know in the comments. But so she gets accepted to Chiltern, and obviously they're all excited, including Rory herself. And I'll deal with the Richard and Emily scene first. So Lorelai sort of finds out that she's not going to be able to pay up front for her tuition, because she was sort of hoping then she could pay in installments, but they're like, no, you've got to pay the whole amount up front. And Lorelai doesn't have the money to do that, so she essentially goes to her parents. And this is where we get the tension, from the moment she opens the door and her mother Emily is there, played by Kelly Bishop, who a lot of people would know from Dirty Dancing before this. And she's really perfectly cast as this stony, icy sort of character, but with a lot of energy. And from the off, there's this tension, there's this distance, and they're both sort of snarking at each other. And it all goes back to, when Lorelai had Rory, and essentially she kind of didn't ask the parents for help. She sort of, at one point Emily criticises her for not settling down and getting married. And again, that's another sort of old-fashioned value, if you have a child, even if it's unplanned like that one was, the responsible thing is to get married. And obviously Lorelai says, neither me or Christopher wanted that. But yeah, so they're sort of immediately trading blows. And actually Emily's best line, which is a beauty, is she says, Lorelai, you're here, it must be Easter. So that's obviously sort of suggesting then she only visits them on holidays, which is funny. And I really like the scene when Richard enters and he's making a drink, and Lorelai is like, she's sort of trying to broach this quite sensitively, and she keeps saying things like there's a situation. And what I really love is Richard keeps saying, and he says it about 3 times, he's saying, so you want to borrow money? And it's just funny that he keeps saying it, and she's like looking for the right words, and eventually she says, yes, okay, I need money, and she explains what it's for. And what I really like about Richard in this scene is his response. He doesn't hesitate. He says, well, sure, if it's for Rory, yes, I'll do it. And obviously they're both excited when they hear about her getting into Chiltern. But what I think is great about Richard's response in this scene is just the fact that in some ways it sort of shows how they approach money differently, and the idea of money, living a very different sort of lifestyle. But I think also there is something where he's truly being nice about it, where he is truly, and it's this idea of, I think most people, if they were lucky enough to have money, that much money, and live very comfortably, certainly I would like to think then I would be generous with it, and if someone I knew and cared about needed help, then sure, they can have the money. So I think it is that very grounded thing with Richard where he knows people need money, and it's a member of the close family. So if Rory needs it, of course I'm going to lend it to you, give it to you, whatever. So I think it is a nice character beat for him, and I think a lot of the tension does come more between Emily and Lorelai than Richard and Lorelai. It's certainly a different dynamic, I think, but so it's a nice moment. But I mean, there is a condition from Emily, and the condition is then Lorelai and Rory have to come to Friday night dinner every week. And essentially it's her way, I think, of having a relationship, not only with her daughter, but more so with Rory, because I think at this point, you know, obviously Emily and Lorelai are both grown-ups, and it's a very fractured relationship. It's maybe hard to see it repaired, although over the course of the show we do see that to an extent. But yeah, I get the impression maybe it's more so she can spend time with Rory. And so obviously Lorelai agrees, and those Friday night dinners become a big part of the show. So that's agreed, but then the sort of end of the episode is that there's a fight between Lorelai and Rory, and it's because Rory sort of has a change of heart about Chilton, says I don't want to go anymore. And she gives these rational explanations like, you know, I'm settled at my current high school, I have friends there. It would be an upheaval, you know, middle of the semester or whatever it is. And they're all kind of logical reasons, but the idea is it's really because she's met Dean and she's kind of, interested in him. And obviously Lorelai doesn't know this at first, and she's kind of pushing Rory on it and say, you know, what's wrong? What's the sudden change of heart? And she obviously doesn't believe the reason she's been given. And then it's Miss Paddy in the scene. She sort of gives away. Then, you know, Rory has been hanging out with Dean, and she, you know, makes a comment, you've got good taste in that, and that's typical Miss Paddy. Bit of a gossip, but I mean, obviously she didn't know, then Lorelai didn't know, but yeah, it's this cheeky little line, the sort of thing she would give. So that's how Lorelai finds out, and she obviously puts two and two together, and comes up with that's the reason Rory doesn't want to go to Chilton. So they have this big bust up over it, and I think what's really good about Alexis in this episode is she's actually really good, because it makes sense than at the start of the show at 16 she would be a more punky kind of downbeat sort of girl, a bit more moody than the character we see in the coming seasons. And she does play that really well. I mean, maybe because I'm assuming she was around that age anyway when the show started. And she definitely has this energy, and you really believe in their dispute in this episode. And so what eventually happens is Rory overhears the fight that Lorelai has with Emily when they're at the house, and that's when she hears about the money. And she does a really sweet thing, which is she's really understanding, and she, you know, offers to buy her mum a cup of coffee. You know, a nice moment, a good insight into their bond. Actually, one thing I will go back a little. One thing I did like is in the scene where they've had this big blow up. Lorelai storms out of her room, slams the door shut, and Rory immediately puts on the Macy Gray CD. And Lorelai does the same in the other room, so I do like that. Even though they've had this big fallout, I do like the fact that they're on the same page, you know, as in they sort of vent by putting on the same CD. But as I was saying, after Rory overhears and she feels bad for her mother, about having to borrow the money and stuff. So yeah, they do sort of make up. She buys her coffee, and they return to Luke's diner, which is a nice bow on the episode because that's where the episode started. And obviously Rory agrees to go to Chilton, and it's obviously silly. So they make up, and the episode ends with them, drinking coffee and chatting, and so again, it's the perfect bow considering how the episode started. And actually, I'll go back to Luke because Luke has one of the best lines of the episode, and it says he hands them a plate of food, and he says, very deadpan again, he says, red meat could kill you, enjoy. And it's a great line, but I love the delivery even more. So the line of the episode goes to Luke. And that's the episode, and I think it's a really good pilot. It's really well paced, it's smooth, and it kind of does that thing a classic pilot should, where it just gives you a good insight into all the characters. It sets them up, what you can expect from them, the sort of storylines you can expect from the show and the tone, but obviously doesn't go too far into things. I think each episode is quite well contained anyway, although as you get more into it, it's obviously more dramatized and continuation. But yeah, a really smooth episode, really well paced, and a lot of fun, a lot of great lines. So really good start to the first season of Gilmore Girls, and from what I can remember, it's a really good first season. So that has been my review of the pilot of the Gilmore Girls. I'll return from time to time with this. I'll keep them coming as fast as I can. But if you're a fan of the show, let me know your thoughts on this episode in the comments below, and do comment on the show in general, maybe favourite characters, favourite sort of storylines, without giving too much away for people who haven't seen beyond this point. But thank you for listening, and I'll be back soon. Goodbye.